So there's been a lot of talk and online hype building up for a brand new show, and with this show coming out and some recent Black Friday purchases, I was finally in the position to get into the world of The Last of Us. I binge played through both games and the DLC, and as a huge video game enthusiast and Naughty Dog enthusiast for that matter, and the show just coming out, I wanted to take a chance to talk about the original Last of Us from 2013, almost a decade ago. Is it as good as its reputation among AAA games has made it out to be? Is it a good idea to adapt? Is it actually better than The Last of Us Part 2? Pretty much we're going to be talking about everything The Last of Us 2013 just in time for the show. So strap in, because I don't get a chance to talk about video games often on here, even though it's my channel and it's my favorite art form. And I'm going to state right off the bat that technically I lied, and I'm not going to be talking about inherently The Last of Us 2013. I'm actually going to be talking about The Last of Us 2014 remaster of the game for PlayStation 4. I've not played The Last of Us Part 1, and I haven't even looked at it at all. I wanted to not look at it at all, so my views wouldn't get changed on this, and I simply wouldn't pay that much for a remake of the game that is still extremely playable on modern systems. So, unless you've been living under a proverbial rock pop culture-wise in video games, it feels almost impossible to not know about The Last of Us, especially in light of the recent release of the show. It has a fairly simple history to recount as Naughty Dog, fresh off the success of the sequel to their latest outing and pushing the limits of video game movie-like storytelling with Uncharted 2 Among Thieves, and they had the backing and the budget to do something they had never done: split the studio into working on two projects at the same time. One half working on the next entry of their action-adventure favorite series with Uncharted 3, headed by Amy Hennig and Justin Richmond, taking the series to honestly the best it had ever been to that point and pushing the bounds of the PS3 even further. And the other team, headed up by Bruce Straley and Neil Druckmann, would work with an idea that Neil had in college to combine elements of the game Ico, a Japanese 3D platformer where you have two characters who switch off playing as they have to work together to get around obstacles and solve puzzles, with classic zombie stories using the two people switch off idea with the idea of an almost father figure having to protect his young girl through a zombie apocalypse. This would develop from a police officer with a heart condition to the lovable but questionably moral smuggler Joel on his job-turned-surrogate daughter to smuggle Ellie across unsoldiered country to try and find the terrorist organization, the Fireflies, because they're looking to try and find a cure for our shroom-inspired zombies, and Ellie just so happens to be immune. It combined the newer Uncharted-style run-and-gun third-person shooter combat with something more weapon system-oriented, like their previous Jak and Daxter, along with survival elements like crafting and limited ammo, encouraging players to get creative approaches to each combat situation they come across. The game not only provided what was essentially a new style of combat for a story game in this vein, but it also grabbed the cinematic flair of its studio's predecessors, bringing a deep and challenging story to the players, focusing on a lot of the uncomfortable and questionable decisions the two make to survive and save each other as the game goes along. With an ending fit alongside the likes of The Sopranos and Inception in terms of leaving mass audiences absolutely baffled and talking about it non-stop for years to come. It was a recipe for success at the time, and it showed. Within the first 7 days of release, it sold over 1.3 million copies, and only a couple weeks later, hitting a whopping 3.4 million, making it one of the best-selling and fastest-selling games of all time, only to later be beat out by Grand Theft Auto 5 in the same year. But, it's Grand Theft Auto 5. But The Last of Us was a hit. It grossed more than Man of Steel did in the same amount of time, and was one of the top-selling games in pretty much every major video game playing country you can think of. And to this day, it has sold well over 20 million copies, and that's not even including the new remake. The series didn't even just connect to mass audiences, it also made big splashes in major game awards next year, getting over 35 major wins and countless more nominations from stuff like the Golden Joysticks Awards and the DICE Awards, and even nominations at the Game Awards for Best Remaster with the 2014 release on the PS4. It has gone down as one of the most universally loved and acclaimed games in recent times, and truly changed the landscape of AAA games forever. But I was not one of the people playing The Last of Us when it came out. Heck, I didn't even play it when The Last of Us Part 2 came out. It was one of the biggest gaming blind spots of my lifetime, having seen the hype and acclaim but never playing it, half due to not having a PS4 until like 2017. But gaming has grown a lot. There are constantly new innovations from small indie studios and technological and story marvels from AAA studios. And I also live in a post-Last of Us Part 2 world where a lot of criticism has been spread to the series as a whole after the rather mixed reception of the sequel. So with my I run a YouTube channel and podcast, so I have to be critical of the art I interact with no matter what hat on, I cautiously started up what almost everyone I know has said to me is one of the best modern story games. And it was interesting. It's hard to deny a story like this as anything less than great. It's truly one of the most powerful and engaging and interesting uses of not only zombie apocalypse storytelling, but also one of the better cinematically written overall stories I've ever seen in a video game. It being a video game, which I'll get to the mechanics more later, puts you even more firsthand into the world these characters are navigating through, and has you personally take actions, no matter how hard or unpleasant, that the characters themselves do. And you have a little bit less of the lack of agency storytelling that Naughty Dog kind of pioneered, with long cinematic cutscenes and a story that you can do very, very little to affect, which I think in this instance plays pretty well with the story they were going for, despite how limiting it feels. They wanted to end on the note they were going for, so that's what you have to end on. The story itself, I will say, isn't perfect in my mind. I mean, nothing's perfect, obviously, but the pacing throughout the game, because it is a video game and you have to have consistent fighting gameplay and gameplay progression in general, can get kind of wonky, as you're essentially moving from place to place to place, fighting a bunch of people and zombies in different situations, finding a clue, moving on, over and over and over again for most of this game, and rarely introducing any side characters. And this can make a good portion of the story feel rather repetitive, as the lines blur from extremist to extremist and town to town, with different elements and bonds grown and separated. But what makes this very simple story structure work is the core of the game's story, the relationship. Paraphrased from a behind-the-scenes video about the making of The Last of Us, capturing Joel and Ellie for The Last of Us, they pretty much say throughout that the game and all of its ideas and world were built around one idea for the relationship between the two characters, and Naughty Dog's approach to a more movie-like creative process really allowing the actors Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson to come to life as their characters and bring their own flares and ideas to the relationship itself, makes the characters come to life in a truly unique way that I have never experienced in a video game. Not even others like Uncharted, despite how much I love those characters, and even games like Spider-Man PS4 and God of War. Joel and Ellie feel so personal and charismatic as actual people in a way that I've never felt from a game. And their central growing relationship, from the cold Joel who's lost everything and won't let anyone in due to what he's been through and done to survive, and the obstinate Ellie who tries to be strong and cynical after losing everyone close to her and having such a big weight and purpose on her despite the fact that she's still just a kid with a truly imaginative and excited heart to see the world and nature and learn about different things. And the way these two ideas and personalities are put through the ringer through their personal goals and ideals is beautifully weaved along with the emotional connection of Joel taking in Ellie as his daughter after never getting over the death of his daughter at the beginning of the infection. Again, not due to infected, but to a random soldier. It makes each minute of the story more exciting, each encounter entertaining, as they constantly play not only with the characters' morals and openness with each other, but simultaneously the safety of them in the story, opening with the death of Joel's smuggling partner Tess, and allowing characters to constantly be in real peril and get serious injuries, also allowing you to get in the mindset of Joel of not trusting anyone you meet along your journey. And then after all the highs and lows the story puts you through, that perfectly gets you connected with the characters and gets you to understand why it's so important to Ellie to have her immunity mean something in a world where she's forced to do so many awful things to protect the one she loves, and even just to save herself. After the world pushes her more and more to see nothing but darkness of the world despite the natural beauty shining through to her, and Joel loosening up more and more and seeming like he's finally happy with someone again despite feeling like she's constantly slipping through his fingers and that every person could be a potential threat, they finally get to Salt Lake City, each equally nervous to get to the Fireflies. Joel because he feels like he's going to lose her, but he also really wants her to find what she's looking for after everything that's happened, and Ellie not knowing what will happen next with her immunity or with Joel. And they immediately separate you once again, something that only happens in times of danger throughout the game. And they tell you as Joel that everything will be alright, that Ellie is the answer to everything and could save the world that's put them through hell and taken everything from both of them. But it's soon revealed, in order to make this cure for the infection, they would have to kill Ellie in the process. And in a split second, Joel's past and his reflexes and his fears that have been building since being reamended with Ellie come out, and he kills everyone who gets in his way to get to Ellie before the surgery. And she's knocked out and doesn't know a thing, and they run away, and when Ellie wakes up, he tells her that they had no answers, that her immunity meant nothing, and that the world is and will be what it is. As they go back to the prospect of a town that Joel's brother Tommy lived at and was trying to build into a real community. Ellie, of course, doesn't fully believe Joel, but she trusts him. She questions him on it one last time after they've journeyed all the way back, stressing all that she had been through, and he sticks to the lie. And that's how the game freaking ends, and it lands so well. They even make you run in and without telling you decide to shoot the doctors yourself to save Ellie. It's genuinely brilliant storytelling, and I cried my eyes out and haven't stopped thinking about it since. Its themes and its core come together so well into making a story that, while not perfect, would move almost anyone with a heart to have an emotional reaction to the story, while also leaving you to re-examine the choices that the characters make throughout the game. Was it all worth it? Is Joel a good person? What have you done? It's truly a marvel brought together with great writing and great actors given the freedom to bring it to life in a really intimate way, even if, especially in the beginning, it takes a lot to get into the story in an investable way and feels a little bit like you're coasting off learning the mechanics. Overall, you'd think that with the way I'm talking about this would be like my new favorite game, or at least my new favorite story game. But it actually isn't. It's not even my favorite game from Naughty Dog. And despite the truly rich story the game offered, it left me more or less unsatisfied and a little disappointed for a couple reasons, most of which have to do with the mechanics. Also, before we get into that, a quick side note about The Last of Us Left Behind. I really wish it was actually just included in the game, because the story would have slid excellently in and provided a little bit more depth to Ellie's backstory, which definitely feels like kind of the weakest thing about the two strong characters. And it also canonizes Ellie being lesbian, which is cool and brings a lot of the character to life even more. I don't know, I actually really loved it, and it was a real highlight after finishing the game. I just wish it was mixed into the game. Heck, it might be one of the things they do with The Last of Us Part 1. I don't know. Mechanics, the lifeblood of video games. I kind of knew what I was getting into playing The Last of Us, coming off of the entire Uncharted series. Naughty Dog, as far as the Uncharted era that I knew, just isn't what you went to for premium mechanics, as most of the Uncharted games have laughably simple controls, encounters, puzzles, and even the gun system is just like 90% preference. Or they'll just hand you exactly what you need. It's pretty much just a playable movie, and for what it is, when it works really well for my particular taste. But you can already feel some of the holes come into this style of game with, like, Uncharted Lost Legacy. When the story is honestly not that great, the entire game really kind of falls apart to really unfun to play through garbage. Which brings up the question of what games really require to be mechanically good. Because I love the Uncharted games, but they're pretty crap mechanically. Put that next to something like Journey, an extremely rich indie game with some of the most fun and engaging and smooth and nice to feel mechanics I've ever played, that also manages to get me extremely emotional every time I play through it, despite zero dialogue or really any directly told story. It's a game for game's sake, not really emulating the movie style that Naughty Dog has kind of become famous for. And that's one of the biggest tears in general of the modern AAA gaming sphere, is many games realizing after, honestly, the success of the Uncharted games, and especially after the success of The Last of Us, is that what audience want is playable movies. And heck, I'll eat up every single one of these darn God of War games they put out, or even Horizon. Several games that use similar cinematics, but build out mechanically more to make it a very interesting and engaging experience, despite how baby mode a lot of the combat in newer God of War games can be. So the question in and of itself is so hard to answer because different games require different needs, mechanically depending on what they're going for. And while I think Journey works great as a game, I would still put it on relatively equal footing with Uncharted 4, even though mechanically they are on different leagues. And there are so many genres and types of games that it's not even funny. RPGs, first-person shooters, rhythm games, platformers, top-downs, arcades, and freaking everything in between. I don't think you can truly get one track set of things that a game is required to hit mechanically to be considered quote-unquote good to me. So keeping this in mind, looking at the gameplay and mechanics of The Last of Us, it's definitely a big improvement on the Uncharted style of pretty much nothing you actually do playing-wise matters, but it sure is fun to get stupid good at headshots with a pistol and do nothing else the whole game. We have a fun, growing weapon system, crafting equipment, a skill tree, and moving around planks of wood, which on paper works out to be pretty mediocre, if not fun, as you actually progress and get stronger, but also is completely held back by the way the game presents itself. Again, due to the repetitive nature of the story as you travel across, you are literally stuck doing the same things over and over, and in the beginning, have very little options and very little ammo. And stealth, while kind of fun in its own, isn't really all that well built of a system because the game seems to not be especially built to use stealth in all situations. The beginning of the game I straight up didn't enjoy playing really at all, as I would struggle to have any resources at all for any of my encounters, and some of the stronger enemies, like the clickers, came in and made it extremely annoying to try and work through as stealth missions because you have to specifically have enough resources that you couldn't hold very much of. So in situations where I came across a bunch of clickers and had very little ammo, or also didn't want to disturb any of the other infected around, I would always end up running out of shivs and having to just use bullets and hope for the best. But with very little ease of motion to get away, and clickers especially killing you in one bite, each of these encounters just built on my frustration, and I just wanted to rush from cutscene to cutscene, as the locations barely changed the setting, and the mechanics simply don't work to tell the story very much. Which brings us to the next major mechanic of the game, the looting. The mechanic technically most related to the story itself, that seems a natural way to tie in the world and the combat and the narrative all together, and it very much encourages you to take time and to go out of your way to go into each house and collect as many resources as you want, and to read all the little notes and really get into the finer details. Which, while I appreciate all the work that they actually put into all of the individual houses and all the little elements, very rarely do I feel like they actually do anything for the story or the rest of the gameplay, and you feel like you're just walking around clicking open, grab, grab, over and over and over again. Yet due to limited inventory space, it's not worth it to go into each and every house to me because I almost always was full up on resources that I needed the most, but then would run out of them extremely quickly into each encounter, which would require me to yet again to rely way heavier on the purposefully light amount of ammo you have at any given time. All these elements are supposed to come together to make the survival element of the world come to life more. But because the story is still so stuck in its linear and tight method of storytelling, unlike something in a similar concept like Horizon, which has you forage and craft weapons throughout in its massive open world, allowing you to naturally move through the world and get in a groove of all the micro details, engaging with the smaller side missions and really taking in the entire world as a whole, in The Last of Us it kind of lacks any depth because you are just going from one encounter to the next, and it always gives you enough. It's not a survival game, or even a puzzle game. I don't have to constantly manage my inventory as I piece together the puzzles of the world like something like the Resident Evil games are so surprisingly good at using to build tension and keep good engagement, because usually it literally doesn't matter what you do or grab either way. As long as you get the bare minimum of items, it essentially becomes Uncharted with more complicated steps and a half-decent stealth system. And it just really bummed me out playing that I never really enjoyed the actual playing of the game. The only exception to my negativity towards the mechanics and how they're implemented into the story and the world is, surprisingly enough, the stupid ladder and plank system, which only is so because it's one of the few mechanics that actually involves what is the core and heart of the game, the relationship between Joel and Ellie. Remember earlier when I mentioned the game Eco? It was one of the base ideas for the creation of this game, a puzzle game that requires you to use two characters that you alternate between to solve puzzles that they couldn't do alone. Think Waterboy and Fire Girl. Now take a look at everything I just described to you mechanically from The Last of Us. Did any of those things involve the use of Ellie as a partner? Sure, you could kind of say that combat does, but oftentimes you more have to protect her than her help you until she gets guns, and even then it's so-so on how much she actually does to help. It kind of feels like that just gets her out of your hair as somebody that you have to constantly protect. There are pretty much no puzzles throughout the entire game, even less so than freaking Uncharted, because those games are in the adventure genre, and their love for conspiracy and puzzles, i.e. Indiana Jones and, I don't know, the Da Vinci Code or something. But don't worry, we do have one thing that sometimes we'll use Ellie for something, and we actually engage with. Freaking grabbing planks and ladders and slowly moving them, or occasionally boosting somebody up, or knocking something down so somebody else can climb up. But credit where credit is due, this is one of the elements that fully gets affected by the story depending on their relationship progression. For instance, after Ellie escapes the cannibals and they're closer in their relationship, but she feels lesser and is questioning her purpose in all of this, it comes through in these interactions, as you may have to ask twice to get her to go and help boost up. And you might get different dialogue depending on situation to situation, and you may have to shoot a random infected that comes up behind while Ellie has crawled in or boosted up into something that you're not at. It feels like the only thing really working with the story and the way the game is built to communicate anything satisfying to the player, and it's yet again one of the most boring and tedious parts of the actual game. There are obviously exceptions to most of these problems, where the mechanics just hit right and it's a joy, and even the combat system itself gets fleshed out as the game goes on, and it's really enjoyable to use by the end of the game. Except for, strangely enough, the last big encounter with the Fireflies, yet again because the main story feels too scripted, so they feed you infinite murder machine ammo for a gun so overpowered you couldn't have it literally for all of the game up to the very end. And honestly, a lot of my problems with the mechanics get infinitely better anytime you're soloing it as Ellie. The Last of Us Part 2 and Left Behind. Because she is so young and has her freaking amazing blade that never freaking breaks, the world feels so much more dangerous and more balanced and natural to explore with the weapon system and the health. and it just feels so much more interesting and really highlights the level of survival elements throughout the rest of the game compared to when you're playing as Joel, which is again sad because what they initially stated they wanted the game to hit was something that on a story and mechanics level relied on the powerful and engaging relationship between our two mains. And while the story certainly follows through in its interesting and unique and powerful ways, I often found the mechanics completely contradictory on even a basic level to the story and the method the game was trying to achieve. I guess in the end, I was equally excited and disappointed to find out that The Last of Us was everything people had said it was, and yet everything I thought it might be. I don't know, I still really loved the story, and I think it was a perfect storm of a game, and is ultimately really fun to play through at least once. But it doesn't even hold the replayability of the popcorn nature of the Uncharted games to me, and really what takes the cake of me feeling more negative towards this game is the negative effects I think it had on the industry as a whole. Again, they learned the simple lesson. If you want to make a profitable game, forget about mechanics, focus on them last, and first make a flashy cinematic experience. And that's such a small piece of what video games can be, leaving so many other genres and styles to be left without the funding to bring them alive in ways that they want. And sure, there are plenty of instances where I think those influences from The Last of Us have led to really fantastic and emotionally exciting games. But even the greatest of them have never really hit the mechanical heights of half of the indie games that are released, and there just seem to be less and less innovative games by big studios as times have gone on. Sure, you can't trace all of the industry's problems to this game, and it has plenty of problems outside of stuff like this, but numbers don't lie, and this game pulled numbers unlike anything in the style of game had before, and so did the next in that style, and the next, and the next, and the awards flooded in. So when looking at The Last of Us as a whole, it almost makes me wonder if this was ever the right medium for it to begin with, despite the idea being so based in video game roots, because the creators never really seemed to want to lean into its video game roots. They wanted to make a movie. Maybe a sequel would remedy some of the problems I have with this game. Maybe even switching the medium to that of a TV show would fit it better. I guess we'll just have to find out, because despite how imperfect this game is, it made me feel something, and it made me fall in love with these characters and this world, so I want to truly see it hit its stride, no matter where that takes us into the depths of madness. So I hope this actually made for a satisfying solo video, because to answer more of the questions that would take more time than I have in this video, so tune in hopefully next month as I dive further into The Last of Us with The Last of Us Part 2. And perhaps even the TV show itself soon, probably once the season ends, as I explore this beautiful passion project and see if it can be turned into something that truly matches the potential and love put into it by everyone involved. Thank you guys for watching. Seriously, it was a very interesting kind of rush to play through all of these games, and I've really been enjoying them. Obviously, I don't think The Last of Us is perfect, but if you really love The Last of Us, that's a-okay. Video games are even more subjective than movies, and whatever you enjoy playing, and that's freaking awesome, because the story is fantastic, and there's no denying that. I cannot wait to talk about The Last of Us Part 2. I have some really, really interesting thoughts on it. I'm excited to get through everything, and I'm really, really excited to check out the TV show, but I want to finish writing my Last of Us Part 2 script before I check out the TV show, so I haven't even watched the first episode yet, but I hope this doesn't take up like my entire channel, or that you guys find this uninteresting or something, but it was just perfect timing, and I never get to talk about video games, so I just wanted to do this, and I'll also get an opportunity to talk about the TV show, so it felt like a good thing. I'll probably work in some other videos in between all of this stuff, but I really hope you guys enjoy this series. Shout out to my Patreon supporter, Robbie Grawey. He's awesome. Also my brother, which is funny. Thank you guys for watching, and I shall catch you next time. Go check out The Last of Us. I love you all. Goodbye.